My sister publicly called me a worthless freeloader. But I was the one holding a truth so devastating, it would crumble her perfect world overnight. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I never expected mine to be served at my sister's birthday party by someone else entirely. My name is Madeline Carter, I'm 25 years old, and until that night, I believed I was the unwanted charity case in a family that barely tolerated my existence. I work as a legal secretary during the day and attend law school at night, scraping together every penny to pay for my education while living in a cramped studio apartment across town. The fluorescent lights in my office buzz constantly, and I've memorized every water stain on the ceiling above my desk. My days start at 6 in the morning with instant coffee and end well past midnight with law books spread across my kitchen table, which doubles as my desk, dining table and study space. Meanwhile, my sister Sabrina Wilson lives in the family mansion, drives a brand new BMW that was a just because gift, and has built an Instagram empire with over 2 million followers who worship her perfectly curated lifestyle of designer handbags, exotic vacations and champagne brunches. The irony wasn't lost on me that she got to keep our father's last name, while I somehow ended up with our mother's maiden name on all my documents. When I was younger, I asked about it once, and Mom just said something vague about paperwork complications and changed the subject so quickly I knew not to ask again. Growing up, I was constantly reminded that I should be grateful. Grateful for the roof over my head. Grateful for the hand-me-down clothes that Sabrina had outgrown or decided she didn't like anymore. Grateful that they even bothered to keep me around when I was clearly such a burden. Sabrina, on the other hand, was their golden child. Every birthday was a spectacle with professional party planners and guest lists that read like society pages. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated with expensive dinners and shopping sprees. Every whim was indulged with the kind of immediate attention that I learned early never to expect for myself. I learned to make myself small, to stay out of the way, to never ask for anything. When Sabrina got a new laptop for school, I saved up for months to buy a refurbished one from a pawn shop. When she complained about her room being too small, they renovated the entire third floor to give her a suite with a walk-in closet and ensuite bathroom. I stayed in the small guest room down the hall from the laundry room, where the washing machine spin cycle would shake my walls every evening. But lately, something felt different in the house. There were whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Conversations that seemed to center around me but never included me. I'd catch fragments. Should have told her years ago and not fair to keep this up. Before the speakers would notice me and switch to talking about the weather or weekend plans with forced brightness. Aunt Margaret, the only family member who'd ever shown me genuine kindness, kept giving me these strange, almost pitying looks. She'd start to say something, then catch herself, shaking her head like she was fighting some internal battle. Last month she'd pulled me aside at Sunday dinner and said, "Madeline, honey, you deserve so much better than this." But when I asked what she meant, she just patted my hand and said, "Never mind, dear. Just remember that sometimes the truth has a way of coming out when we least expect it." The family photos from my childhood had mysteriously disappeared from the main hallways, relegated to dusty boxes in the attic. When I asked about it, Mom just shrugged and said they were redecorating and wanted a more modern aesthetic. But I noticed that the photos of Sabrina remained prominently displayed, including several from when she was a baby that I'd never seen before. The tension in the house reached its peak as Sabrina's 23rd birthday approached. She'd been planning this party for months, treating it like a royal coronation. She hired Evangeline Morrison, the most expensive event planner in the city, the woman who'd organized the mayor's daughter's wedding and the annual charity gala for the children's hospital. She rented out the ballroom at the Riverside Country Club, the kind of place where memberships were passed down through generations, and the waiting list was longer than most people's mortgages. Sabrina spent weeks crafting the perfect guest list, inviting every influencer, socialite, business contact, and potential networking opportunity she could think of. The list read like a who's who of our city's elite: tech entrepreneurs, real estate moguls, socialites whose names appeared in the society pages, and celebrities who'd moved to our city for the tax benefits and privacy. I watched her plan every detail with the kind of obsessive precision usually reserved for military operations. She had 3 dress fittings for a custom Valentino gown that cost more than my entire yearly income. She hired a professional photographer, a videographer, and even a social media coordinator, to ensure every moment was captured and optimized for maximum online impact. I wasn't even sure I was invited until Sabrina casually mentioned 2 days before the event that I could help with coat check or something if I wanted to feel useful for once. The way she said it, like she was doing me a favor by allowing me to work at her party, should have been warning enough. I should have seen it coming. I should have trusted that gnawing feeling in my gut that told me something was about to go horribly wrong. But I was 25 years old and still desperately hoping that maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see me as more than an obligation. Maybe this would be the night when Sabrina would acknowledge our relationship as sisters, when my parents would introduce me as their daughter instead of Madeline, who lives with us. The night of the party, I put on my one decent dress. A simple black number I'd bought on sale 2 years ago from a discount retailer. It was conservative, appropriate, and completely unremarkable, which seemed fitting for my role in the family. I spent an hour trying to style my hair with drugstore products and a curling iron I'd borrowed from my neighbor, achieving what I generously called presentable. I drove my beat-up Honda to the country club, the engine making that concerning rattling noise it had been making for the past month. The contrast was immediately obvious as I pulled into the circular driveway. Valets in crisp uniforms were taking keys to Porsches, Bentleys, and Ferraris while I parked my car in the back lot myself, hoping no one would notice the duct tape holding my side mirror on. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, or perhaps a movie set. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses cast rainbow prisms across walls draped in silk and covered with cascading arrangements of white orchids and roses. A champagne fountain dominated one corner, surrounded by ice sculptures that depicted various scenes from Sabrina's life. Her graduation, her first viral social media post, even her beloved Persian cat Mr. Whiskers. Round tables draped in ivory linens surrounded a dance floor that gleamed under spotlights, each table centerpiece a work of art featuring rare flowers flown in from Amsterdam. The stage at the front of the room was set up with professional sound equipment and lighting that could have serviced a concert venue. Sabrina held court in the center of it all, wearing her custom Valentino gown that sparkled with thousands of hand-sewn crystals. Her hair had been styled by the same team that worked with A-list celebrities, swept into an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings that had belonged to our grandmother. She looked absolutely stunning, like a princess from a modern fairy tale, and she knew it. I watched from the sidelines as she posed for pictures with local celebrities, laughed at unfunny jokes from potential business partners, and basked in the attention of 200 of the city's most important people. Every conversation seemed to revolve around her latest business ventures, her social media success, her upcoming collaborations with luxury brands. The guests were exactly what you'd expect from such an event. Women in designer gowns that cost more than most people's cars, men in custom suits discussing real estate deals and stock options, everyone holding champagne flutes and speaking in the kind of refined tones that suggested private schools and trust funds. I tried to blend into the background, helping myself to a small plate of hors d'oeuvres from the elaborate buffet. Even the food was a spectacle. Caviar stations, sushi prepared by a James Beard award-winning chef, small bites that were more art than sustenance. I felt ridiculously out of place, like a paper doll in a room full of porcelain figurines. The evening progressed with the kind of smooth precision that only comes from professional event planning and unlimited budgets. There were speeches from local dignitaries, a live performance by a jazz quartet that usually played at five-star hotels, and a dessert presentation that involved actual fireworks shooting from a 3-tiered cake. I was standing near the back of the room, trying to make myself invisible, when I heard the microphone feedback screech through the sound system. Sabrina had taken the stage, her perfectly veneered smile gleaming under the spotlights as she prepared to give her birthday speech. The room fell silent, all 200 guests turning their attention to the birthday girl. I expected the usual gratitude speech, maybe some humble bragging about her success, perhaps a toast to the future and all the wonderful opportunities ahead. What I didn't expect was for her to single me out. Before I thank everyone for coming tonight, Sabrina's voice rang out clear and sharp through the professional sound system. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special. My sister Madeline is here tonight. A spotlight suddenly blazed on me, operated by the professional lighting crew she'd hired. I felt 200 pairs of eyes turn in my direction, some curious, some confused, most completely indifferent. My stomach dropped like I was in a free-falling elevator. Many of you don't know Madeline because, well, she's not exactly part of our social circle. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. The way she said it made it clear that this wasn't going to be the heartwarming sister moment I'd foolishly hoped for. I felt my cheeks burning, my hands starting to shake. The spotlight was hot and bright, making me feel exposed and vulnerable in a way I'd never experienced before. Madeline represents something important to our family, Sabrina continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she usually reserved for service workers and anyone she considered beneath her social status. She's a reminder of what charity looks like. You see, my parents took her in when she had nowhere else to go. She's not technically family, but we've fed her, housed her, and tried our best to make something of her despite her limitations. The room had gone completely silent except for the soft background music that someone had forgotten to turn off. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the air conditioning. I think it's important that everyone here understands the difference between earning your place in the world and being handed one out of pity. Sabrina's smile was cruel now, predatory, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. Madeline has been living off our family's generosity for years, contributing nothing, achieving nothing, just existing. Like a parasite that we've been too kind to remove. Someone in the crowd gasped audibly. I heard a woman whisper, "Oh my God, is she really doing this?" But most of the guests just watched in the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for car accidents and reality TV. I felt like I was drowning in humiliation, my vision starting to blur at the edges. This was worse than anything I'd imagined. This wasn't just rejection or disappointment. This was deliberate, calculated destruction. So tonight I want to announce that our family will no longer be enabling this dependency. Sabrina's voice grew stronger, more confident, as if she was feeding off the crowd's shocked attention. Madeline, effective immediately, you're on your own. It's time you learned what the real world looks like without a safety net you never deserved in the first place. The applause that followed was scattered and uncomfortable. The kind of nervous clapping people do when they don't know what else to do. Most of the guests looked deeply uncomfortable, some were whispering to each other, and a few were already reaching for their phones, no doubt preparing to spread this gossip through their social networks. I stood there, frozen in the spotlight, feeling like I was going to vomit. My dress felt too tight, the room too small, the air too thin. This was it. This was how my relationship with the only family I'd ever known would end. With public humiliation and abandonment in front of 200 strangers who would remember me only as the pathetic charity case who got her comeuppance. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there, to disappear, to never show my face in this city again. I actually took a step toward the exit, my legs shaky and unreliable, when something stopped me. That something was the sight of Aunt Margaret slowly rising from her seat at table 12. She was 78 years old, barely 5 feet tall, wearing a simple navy dress and her late husband's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. But in that moment, she commanded the attention of the entire ballroom with nothing more than the determined set of her shoulders and the steel in her eyes. She walked slowly to the front of the room, her cane tapping against the marble floor with each deliberate step. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like a countdown timer, each tap building tension until the entire room was holding its breath. "Sabrina, dear," Aunt Margaret said, her voice carrying despite its softness cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. "I think you've said quite enough." Sabrina's confident smile faltered for the first time all evening. "Aunt Margaret, this is my party. I don't think, no child you don't think. That much has become painfully obvious." Aunt Margaret reached the stage with surprising grace for her age, and gently took the microphone from Sabrina's suddenly nerveless fingers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something this family should have addressed years ago." My heart was still racing, but now it was racing with a different kind of energy. I could see the color draining from Sabrina's face as she realized that her moment of triumph was about to be interrupted by someone she couldn't control or intimidate. "You see," Aunt Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding in this family for far too long. A lie that was told with good intentions to protect someone's feelings, but has instead created something monstrous." She turned to look directly at Sabrina, who had gone completely pale beneath her professional makeup. "Sabrina, Sweetie, you are not a Wilson, you never were. You were adopted when you were 6 months old, after your birth mother, my dear friend Patricia Carson, died in a car accident on Highway 95 in December of 1999. The ballroom erupted in whispers and shocked gasps. I heard someone drop a champagne flute, the crystal shattering against the marble floor. Sabrina staggered backward like she'd been physically struck. We loved you from the moment you came into our lives, Aunt Margaret continued relentlessly. But somewhere along the way, we failed you. We let you believe you were something you weren't, and we let you treat someone precious as if she were disposable. The spotlight operator, clearly confused about what to do, kept the light trained on me as Aunt Margaret spoke. But now it felt different. Not like an interrogation light, but like recognition, like I was finally being seen for who I really was. Madeline. Aunt Margaret's voice grew warm and filled with a love I'd never heard directed at me before. Is the only biological child of Robert and Catherine Wilson. She is the rightful heir to the Wilson family name, the Wilson family fortune, and the Wilson family legacy. She always has been. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet, like I was falling through space and time. The room was spinning, voices were echoing strangely, and I couldn't quite process what I was hearing. The adoption papers are in the family safe, Aunt Margaret continued, each word falling like a hammer blow. The birth certificates are there too. We have DNA tests that were done years ago when Robert was worried about inheritance laws and estate planning. Every legal document that matters tells the same story. Madeline is our blood, and Sabrina is our beloved adopted daughter, who was given everything but somehow learned nothing about gratitude, humility, or basic human decency. Sabrina's perfect composure crumbled completely. That's not. You're lying. You're lying. Her voice cracked, high and desperate, no longer the confident socialite but a frightened young woman whose entire world was collapsing. I'm not adopted, I'm not. Look at me, look at this party, look at my life. Does this look like the life of an adopted child? But the truth was written all over my parents' faces as they sat at the head table, looking like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Mom had tears streaming down her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. Dad couldn't meet anyone's eyes, staring down at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. We thought, Dad finally spoke, his voice barely audible even through the microphone system. We thought if we treated you both the same, if we never made distinctions based on biology, we thought it would be easier for everyone. Easier? I found my voice for the first time all evening, and it came out stronger than I expected, carrying across the silent ballroom. You thought it would be easier to let her torment me my entire life? To let me believe I was worthless, unwanted, a burden on your generous family? The room was completely silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen in place like actors in a tableau. You let her humiliate me tonight in front of 200 people because you thought it would be easier than telling the truth. I was walking toward the stage now, and people were moving out of my way automatically, creating a path like I was dangerous. Maybe I was. You let me work 3 jobs to pay for law school while she got a trust fund and a luxury car and a credit card with no limit. You let me live in a studio apartment across town while she got an entire floor of the family mansion. You let me believe I was a charity case while the real charity case was calling me a parasite. Each question hit the room like a physical blow. I could see people in the audience reassessing everything they thought they knew, their faces showing the kind of horrified realization that comes when a carefully constructed lie finally falls apart. Sabrina was backing away from me, shaking her head frantically. No, this is wrong, this is all wrong. I'm the daughter, I'm the real daughter, look at me. She gestured wildly at her designer gown, her perfect hair, her flawless makeup, her diamond jewelry. Does she look like she belongs in this family? Look at her dress, look at her hair, look at her life. Belonging isn't about what you wear or how much money you spend, I said, reaching the stage and looking out at the sea of faces staring back at me. It's about how you treat people. It's about character. It's about earning respect instead of demanding it because of what you think you're entitled to. I turned to address the crowd directly, the same crowd that had watched my humiliation just minutes before with such uncomfortable fascination. My name is Madeline Wilson. I am 25 years old. I work full-time as a legal secretary and attend law school at night because I was never given the privilege of having my education handed to me on a silver platter. I live in a studio apartment that I pay for with my own money. because I was never offered a room in my own family's home. I drive a car I bought with money I saved from working since I was 16 because I was never gifted a BMW for my birthday. My voice was getting stronger with each word, fed by years of suppressed anger and frustration finally finding an outlet. But I have never, not once, asked anyone to pity me. I have never demanded special treatment because of my circumstances. I have never stood in front of a room full of people and tried to destroy someone else to make myself feel bigger or more important. Sabrina was crying now, her perfect makeup streaming down her face in black and brown rivulets, her carefully styled hair coming undone. "This isn't fair," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "This isn't fair. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? You didn't know because you never questioned why you deserved everything while I deserved nothing," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "You didn't know because you never once asked why I was treated like a servant in what you now know is my own family's home. You didn't know because you never wanted to know, because knowing would have meant acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, you weren't as special as everyone told you you were." The crowd was starting to shift uncomfortably. I could see people whispering to each other, phone screens glowing as guests began checking social media and sending messages. I knew what they were thinking. They were reassessing every interaction they'd ever had with both of us. They were remembering every time Sabrina had name-dropped her family connections, every time she'd flaunted her wealth like it was a personal achievement, every time she'd treated service workers or lesser people with casual disdain. And they were looking at me with something I'd never seen before: respect. "I don't want your pity now," I announced to the room, my voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "I don't want your guilt or your sympathy or your sudden interest in being my friend because you've discovered I'm worth knowing. What I want is for everyone here to remember this moment. Remember that the person you thought was worth following on social media, worth doing business with, worth inviting to your events, was willing to publicly destroy someone she believed was defenseless." I paused, looking around the room at faces that had shifted from entertainment to discomfort to something approaching shame. Remember that real character isn't about what you have, it's about what you do with what you have. It's about how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. It's about whether you build others up or tear them down to make yourself feel better. I walked off the stage and headed for the exit, my head held high for the first time in years. Behind me, I could hear Sabrina's sobs getting louder, more desperate. I could hear the uncomfortable murmur of conversation starting up again as people tried to process what had just happened, tried to figure out what this meant for their relationships with both families, tried to calculate the social and business implications of what they'd just witnessed. Aunt Margaret caught up with me at the ballroom doors, moving surprisingly quickly for someone with a cane. "Madeline, honey, wait." I turned to face her, this tiny woman who had just turned my entire world upside down with a few minutes of brutal honesty. "Why now?" I asked, my voice quieter now that we were away from the microphone and the crowd. "Why did you wait until tonight? Why did you let it go on this long?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she looked every one of her 78 years. "Because I couldn't watch them destroy you anymore. Because you deserved so much better than what they gave you, and she deserved to face consequences for what she'd become." She reached up and touched my cheek gently with a hand that was soft and warm and felt like forgiveness. "And because I'm 78 years old, and I won't be around much longer to make this right. I couldn't go to my grave knowing I'd let this continue." The legal aftermath was swift and merciless. Within a week, DNA tests confirmed what Aunt Margaret had announced to the world. The family lawyers, a prestigious firm that had handled Wilson family business for 3 generations, had to completely restructure the estate plans. Sabrina's access to family accounts was immediately frozen pending legal review. Her trust fund, which she'd been living off while building her influencer career, was redirected to me as the rightful heir. But the social consequences were even more devastating for her than the financial ones. The video of that night, of course someone had been filming, multiple people actually, went viral within hours. Not in the way Sabrina was used to, with adoring fans and sponsored content and carefully curated engagement, but as a cautionary tale about privilege and cruelty that spread across every social media platform. The hashtag Sabrina Wills Nexposed trended for 3 days. Her follower count plummeted from over 2 million to less than 100,000 as people unfollowed in droves. Brands started canceling contracts faster than her management team could field the calls. The lifestyle she'd built her entire identity around crumbled in real time, documented and dissected by the same social media ecosystem that had once worshipped her. I watched it happen from my studio apartment, where I continued to live despite suddenly having access to more money than I'd ever imagined. I could have moved into the family mansion immediately. I could have claimed the BMW, the designer clothes, the country club membership, all the material symbols of the life I'd been denied. But I didn't want any of it. Not like that, not as spoils of war. Instead, I used my newfound resources to finish law school without working 3 jobs to survive. For the first time in my adult life, I could focus entirely on my studies, and my grades reflected it. I graduated summa cum laude and was offered positions at several prestigious firms, though I ultimately chose to start my own practice specializing in family law and adoption cases. I also started a scholarship fund for kids aging out of the foster system, young people who knew what it felt like to be unwanted and uncertain about their place in the world. I bought a modest house in a neighborhood where people knew me as the lawyer who helped with their problems, not as the Wilson heiress or the girl from the viral video. Sabrina tried to reach out several times in those first few months. Desperate phone calls that went straight to voicemail, tear-stained letters that I read once and then filed away, even showing up at my new law office once with red eyes and a story about how sorry she was, and how we could be real sisters now that the truth was out. But I had nothing to say to her. She hadn't apologized for decades of cruelty. She'd only expressed anger about losing her privileged position. She wanted me to help her get back what she thought she deserved, not to acknowledge what she'd done to me or show any understanding of how her actions had affected my life. Her sorrow was entirely self-focused, mourning her lost status rather than the relationship she'd destroyed through years of calculated meanness. The last I heard, she'd moved to Los Angeles, trying to rebuild her influencer career under a different name with a focus on authenticity and overcoming adversity. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I honestly didn't spend much time thinking about it. She'd become someone else's problem, someone else's cautionary tale. My parents tried to reconcile too, of course. They wanted to explain, to justify, to somehow make sense of the choices they'd made. Dad wrote me long letters about how they'd thought they were protecting everyone, how they'd believed that love could overcome biological differences, how they'd never meant for things to get so out of hand. Mom showed up at my office several times, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with photo albums from my childhood that she'd found in storage, always with explanations that somehow made their behavior seem reasonable and well-intentioned. But their explanations always came back to the same theme. They'd been trying to protect Sabrina's feelings by sacrificing mine. They'd been so worried about making their adopted daughter feel loved and secure that they'd forgotten to love their biological daughter at all. They'd been so afraid that Sabrina would feel different or less than that they'd made me feel worthless instead. I didn't cut them off completely, but I didn't pretend everything was fine either. We have dinner once a month now, stiff and formal affairs at neutral restaurants, where we talk about safe topics like the weather and current events, and my work helping other families navigate complex legal situations. Maybe someday we'll find our way back to something resembling a real relationship. Maybe we won't. I'm okay with either outcome. The most unexpected part of this whole experience was discovering that I didn't need their acceptance to be happy. For 25 years I'd been trying to earn something that should have been freely given. I'd been apologizing for taking up space in my own family, grateful for scraps when I should have been expecting a full meal, working twice as hard to prove I deserved half as much. But that night at the country club, when Aunt Margaret spoke the truth that everyone had been hiding, I realized something important. I had never been the broken one in this family. I was just the one who had been taught to believe I was broken, who had been conditioned to accept less because I'd been told I deserved less. The girl who had stood in that spotlight, humiliated and broken, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who demanded respect, and who would never again apologize for taking up space in her own life. A woman who had learned that belonging isn't about being chosen by others. It's about choosing yourself. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.